Hello and most welcome to 1624 of the series. And we will continue. We had a rather bit of luck. It was a lot of fantastic things from Life, Death by Jacques Derrida. We were into the second session and it was, I would say, extremely fruitful, almost hard to digest. And we are doing another one smack on. It's even given me the inspiration having more than two texts to have an alternative. But today we don't have a choice, so we continue with this. And we are currently at page 46. And it's the third sentence, and we'll continue. The possibility. The possibility of this perverting simplification is to be found. So long as one refrains from distinguishing between unconscious programs and deliberate ones. So long as one no longer takes into account only intention in reading a text. In the very structure of the text. And this must be something we are able to read. There's nothing fortuitous in the fact. Even if Nietzsche's intention had nothing to do with it, that his discourse should have served as a reference for Nazi ideologues, and that the only politics that actually privileged it as a major reference should have been Nazi. I do not mean to suggest that this is forever the only possibility, or that it corresponds to the best reading of Nietzsche, or that those who did not refer to it had read Nietzsche as well. The future of Nietzsche's text is not closed. I simply wish to say that the fact that during a determined and limited period of time, the only actually self-styled Nietzschean politics was Nazi is itself necessarily significant, and must be questioned as such. When I say this, I do not mean to say that, knowing what Nazism is, we should begin to reread Nietzsche from a politico-historical point of view. I do not believe that we know yet what Nietzsche is. That task too is still before us, and a political reading of Nietzsche is part of that. Has Nietzsche's grand politics already run its course, or is it still to come in the wake of the Siaism of which Nazism would have been but an episode? It is the passage, "Why I am a fatality," and it suggests that we will read the name Nietzsche only when a grand politics will in fact come onto the scene, and that consequently the question of knowing whether this or that lesser politics is or is not Nietzschean is irrelevant insofar as the name Nietzsche is not yet read here. This name still has its entire future before it. Here is the passage. I know my fate. One day my name will be associated with the memory of something tremendous. A crisis without equal on earth. The most profound collision of consciousness, consciences. a decision that was conjured up against everything that had been believed, demanded, hallowed so far. I am no man. I am dynamite. Yet for all that, there's nothing in me of a founder of a religion. Religions are affairs of the rabble. I find it necessary to wash my hands after I have come in contact with religious people. I want no believers. I think I am too malicious to believe in myself. I never speak to masses. The concept of politics will have merged entirely with the war of spirits. All power structures of the old society will have been exploded. All of them are based on lies. There will be wars the likes of which have never yet been seen on earth. It is only beginning with me that the earth knows große Politik. We have no need, I believe, to decide. The interpretive decision does not need to decide between two political contents or intentions of these texts. Interpretations are not hermeneutics of reading, but political interventions in the political rewriting of the text. This has always been the case, but especially so since what is called the end of philosophy, since the textual indicator named Hegel . It is not an accident, but an effect of the structure of all post-Hegelian texts that there can always be a right and a left Hegelianism, a right and the left Heideggerianism, a right and the left Nietzscheanism. And even, we must not forget, a Marxism of the right and a Marxism of the left. Is there something in Nietzsche that can help us? And help us in a specific way to understand this political structure of the text and of interpretation? That is the question that would need to be elaborated. Does Nietzsche offer us anything to understand the double interpretation and perversion of his text? He says that there must be something unheimlich in the suppression by force of the least degenerate needs. Why is it unheimlich? That is another form of the same question. To conclude today, I would say just a word more about what I announced at the beginning under the title of Academic Freedom and the Ear. When Nietzsche recommends linguistic training as opposed to the academic freedom that leaves teachers and students free in their thinking, in their programs, in their choice of subjects, and so on. It is not because he thinks that constraints has to be opposed to freedom, but because he diagnoses behind this so-called academic freedom a fierce constraint that is all the more effective for being dissimulated. And this constraint is exercised by the state, which through this supposed academic freedom controls everything. The state stands as the great target of the accusation in these lectures and Hegel. The thinker of the state, the great culprit, the autonomy of universities, teachers, and students is in fact a ruse of the state, the absolutely complete ethical organism. The state wants to attract, says Nietzsche. Docile and wholly dedicated public servants through controls and rigorous constraints. And in fact, these lectures can also be read as a modern critical analysis of the state's cultural apparatuses, and particularly of that fundamental cultural apparatus that in a modern state is the state's academic cultural apparatus. There's little doubt that this critique would be carried out from a point of view that quite probably, though we would here need to examine things more closely and proceed more slowly, would make of a Marxist analysis of state apparatuses, of the Marxist concept of ideology, and so on, a symptom of degeneration and a new form of servitude to the Hegelian state. But one would have to look a lot more closely on the one side and the other. Beneath everything that appears to make of Nietzsche an unquestionable adversary of socialism in general. It would be necessary to see how elsewhere the critique of the state, one of Nietzsche's most constant preoccupations, will be developed right up to the fragments of the will to power and Zarathustra. The state, this hypocritical hound, whispers in your ear through its educational apparatuses, which are in fact acoustic or achromatic apparatuses. You are long-eared beasts, inasmuch as, rather than being obedient, rather than obeying with your small ears the best of masters and the best of leaders, you believe yourselves to be free and autonomous, while all you do is turn your big ears towards the discourse of the state. Controlled as it is by reactive and degenerate forces. Hanging on every word of the state, you have transformed yourselves into one big ear, the ear coming to occupy a disproportionate place on your body as in the appearance of a body almost totally reduced to an ear in Zarathustra. And here is my last question for this session. Next time, we will return by means of another loop to Jacob and Kangelam on the question of the program, which we have not abandoned. My last question would be this. It is our scene, our pedagogical scene, that Nietzsche is describing in the passage I am about to read. It is a question of the same ear. It is the same ear that you lend me, or that I myself lend in speaking. Or are we hearing all of this already with another ear? I do not believe there to be a simple answer to this question. Which I prefer to let do its work all by itself. Here is the ear passage in the 5th lecture. Permit me, however, to measure this independence of yours by the standard of this culture, and to consider your university as an educational institution and nothing else. If a foreigner desires to know something of the methods of our university, he asks first of all with emphasis, how is the student connected with the university? We answer, by the ear, as a hearer. The foreigner is astonished. Only by the ear, he repeats. only by the ear, we again reply. And I will have a little look at the quotes, gems of the text. So we see that Nietzscheism has one successor, and that is within the Nazi ideology. Compare that with a determinate where there is no choice, where one thing goes over in another, and Nietzscheism becomes right-wing Nazism. This is the determinate history. Something that is questioned, or I would say rather in the Derridian text, undermined. Once more we have necessity instead of mechanistic determinacy. And one thing to point to the verso and the recto of that we find on page 47. It is not an accident, it's further down. It is not an accident, but an effect of the structure of all post-Hegelian texts, that there can always be a right and a left Hegelianism, a right and a left Heideggerianism, and a right and a left Nietzscheism. And even we must not forget a Marxism of the right and a Marxism of the left. Once more we have the verso and the recto. Heads or tail, as we have with the coin. Once more undecidedness enters into the game and sort of underneath loosen up the determinacy of Nietzscheanism passing into Nazism. It's softening, and we see that the polysemia, or as my colleague called it, irony, of what we think is so determined with the absolute oppositions, especially life and death, makes it move. This very movement, I would say, and this is my take on it, this is life. That is life. That is why life and death becomes life. And that's why the Gödelian artificial AI will never ever become a possibility. Despite the fact that almost everyone believes in it. This is why texts like this and thinkers like Derrida, Heidegger, Wittgenstein are so absolutely important. Further down on page 48, there is an important thing. Because at the very late, we come into ear. And this is within parenthesis. Reduction of the body to an ear is entering into the monosemic state, I would say, just shortly. And we are long-eared beasts rather than being obedient. So we're listening, and this listening in makes us susceptible, you could say, to the magic of only one understanding. Yes, this is the Tractatus view. This is the Gödelian take. Listen in only and do not do anything. Mentioned before in the text as only knowing and not doing. Only the ear. There's nothing wrong with the ears, but only the ear. And you get this obedient long-earedness. This is in his speech, the last page, 49, taken up by Derrida. And how they at the university only use the ears, only passively hear. And I would say this passivity is the experience of monosemism, of the father, of obedience to the Führer. It becomes clearer than ever. Kalle, maybe a comment here? You need to...
Oh, yes. Yes, we discussed the ear in previous lectures, and we discussed the oui, which means both yes and to listen in French. Oui, oui, the same pronunciation. And Derrida has a positive view of hearing, of course, but on the other hand, you have to have balance there.
Very good.
And you rightly, okay, so here is the father figure, but should we say, then say the mouse is the mother, I don't know. Perhaps the ear is it's also something active, as you pointed out in the past. We know that listening today, we think about the organ ear as only having passive, what we call them receptors, but we know that the ear is something active also, like the eye too.
Yes, definitely. We see the ear as maybe the most passive organ because of schooling, because of the academia, because of the universities.
Indeed, and when I study manuscripts, scholars always say, here you have a mishearing. Aja baja, aja baja.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's something problematic with this view. Because you have also, what about the active ear, which creates something? Okay,
Yes.
passive ear and the active ear that create something. Like it's superposition between when you hear the word we, it's
Yes.
like the superposition, but when you see it written, that's we, yes, or we listen. Superposition collapses when you see it written. So it's ice perhaps that often collapses the superposition. I'm simplifying now, of course, but we could say that in my oversimplification, the ear is the superposition, but eyes are the that which makes it crash, so to say.
Yeah, definitely. And very good that with we, because it also means follow, if I remember correctly, no?
You mean suivre? Je suis.
Ah, yes, yes.
Yes, je suis in French means both I am, but also I follow. Yes, you have to actually see it written in order to be able to understand the difference. So the writing and the eye is that makes the superposition collapse. So I don't know what is passive. So yes, passive. Ear is in one way passive. Yes, okay, in relative sense, and the eye is something, perhaps something active. In this oversimplification, but it might. Sometimes you have to oversimplify.
Think about that, listen up and listen carefully and moving one's ear into the direction of what you're listening to, which is very obvious today and often creates bad posture when you try to listen in to teachers and so forth.
Yes.
We should remember in the context that 3 times as many nerves go to the ears than from the ears. So they are actually constructed to be much more active.
I think we should end there. Your library closes at 5 p.m. So.
Yes. I should only say that Ian McGilchrist, the famous psychiatrist and now researcher into the left-right hemisphere difference, he thinks that hearing was much more participatory and active and creative in early antiquity, at the time of Homer and the Odyssey. That is also interesting.
Yes, with the rhapsodies and so on, you have to listen to the poet. You have to have a very, 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 very active ear.
Definitely, definitely. Creative ear. And at the same time as creative, you also make something that is objective, shareable, whereas the passive listening becomes non-shareable, becomes almost like the private language in Wittgenstein. It is like the passive listening is speaking to the voice within, that there is an inner understanding of some sort, which has been discussed both by Derrida and Wittgenstein. But okay, thank you very much, Kalle.
Thank you, thank you.
Excellent. I'll stop the recording. I say thank you to all who listened in. Thank you for your patience. And until next, here I am, 1623.